Matthias is one of the leaders of RIAD, a Vienna-based organization, and I would say very close one in terms of values and program and intents to Parallel Polis. So I'm very pleased that you came. And since Matthias is also a board member of Open Hardware Association, he's gonna present presentation about topic of hardware security, trust, and he's gonna take a special insight into this problematics in terms of recently running months of open hardware. So we're gonna talk about trust and verification and other security measures in hardware we trust or do not. So thank you, Matthias.
Thank you very much. Hello and welcome everyone. I'm very excited to be here. So my talk is called The Past, Present and Future of Opt-out with Open and LIBRE Hardware. And I want to relate this a little bit to this kind of ideas of crypto anarchy and how we can actually regain these certain things we might have lost already with hardware, with open hardware. This all is also part of the Open Hardware Month, so we are now in the month of open hardware. I will explain a little bit initially what this is about, but first I want to give a brief overview of what I will be covering, what topics we will be covering today. So I will first contextualize a little bit, then I will give an introduction to open hardware. What is it for, why do we need it? And also I will give a few examples, a few tangible examples on how we can use that to regain specific crypto-anarchic principles or attempts that we might have lost already if we don't do so. I will look and briefly explain also why this is important and why open and LIBRE hardware can help us in this regards. So as I'm referring to a lot of different projects, and I'm always, as you people know me also from last year, having a lot of hyperlinks in my presentation. I will also put the slides up again this year on the RIAD website. So remember riad.at/HCPP19. And I also want to point to 3 other talks I have been giving already in the past, which are in this scope somehow. So there's one, on the one hand, the 32C3 presentation on the Albertus Axiom open source cinema camera, which you can rewatch. All these things are on YouTube. There was a Transmediale panel about future factories in 2016 where I have been participating, which is also in the context of my talk today. And more recently on MoneroCon 2019, I was speaking about critical decentralization, open and LIBRE hardware. So this is also related. So if you want to dig deeper, you can follow these online links here. The context of all this is actually me, first of all. I'm a research designer and a project developer. I'm working with the RIAD Institute, but also I'm one of the board members of the OSHWA, of the Open Source Hardware Association. You can contact me if you're interested in any of these topics I will be covering today, especially if you're working with crypto and open hardware, because we will be also doing a lot of interviews and preparing a lot of documentation and publications in this context. So briefly to explain what RIAD is, so we are an independent institute in Vienna, based in Vienna and Cyprus mostly, but we operate globally, and we are working specifically with privacy technologies, with open hardware, and with aspects of future decentralization. So in a way, you can find most of the stuff online, so I don't want to cover everything here, but we are working mostly with documentation and with actual tangible outcomes, such as publications. So this is a recent publication that we also distributed here last year in the institute here as well, and this was also for a longer time available in the Parallel Policies. This was the last issue of the Future Crypto Economics magazine. We are continuing developing this, and the next issue will be about open hardware. This is an older book actually, but still very, very relevant. I was going through the aspects of it and again rereading everything, and we covered maybe 10% of all the open hardware interviews we have been doing with a lot of open hardware practitioners in order to find out what are the motivations, why are they open sourcing things that are usually kept private. So in technology, in open source culture, especially in hardware, you have a lot of intellectual property rights and not so many things are open, as you would guess and as you would know. So this book will also be in a special edition given out and handed out tomorrow, because we will be also hosting a workshop tomorrow together with Riddle and Code. So there will be a few more left. So if someone is interested, please contact us after the talk. Yeah, as I was saying, there's the October Open Hardware Month, which is happening right now. And what does that actually mean? So it means the OSHWA is organizing worldwide events, but not only OSHWA, individuals, hackerspaces, people that work in the field of open hardware. And they're also communicating, documenting, and making this all a topic, explaining what is happening, explaining why they're open source, and also trying to explain about the specific projects. There's the OHM 2019 hashtag on Twitter, where you can follow what is going on globally. And in case you are from a hardware background or you have some event, you can still post this online. So there's an ongoing list and growing list of international events happening there. I want to briefly also explain what the OSHWA is, the Open Source Hardware Association. So I won't go through all the details here that are listed here, but this is the core purposes and activities of the OSHWA, to organize conferences, to educate the general public, and to collect, compile, and publish data on the open source hardware movement. But in a way also to document what is going on. It's a quite complex topic, and I will briefly explain also why this is the case. So this is maybe a very tangible thing that you can browse through about the OSHWA or from the OSHWA. It's the certification website. There's a lot of different open source open source hardware association certified projects online there. It's a directory online, and you can see a lot of different projects. Also, some of them I will be speaking about today. Another very important thing is there is the Open Source Hardware Summit, or Open Hardware Summit, which is happening every year. And this year it's not happening, so this is why we have the Open Hardware Month. But this is a very important next year's event, because this will be the 10th anniversary of the Open Source of the Open Hardware Summit, which will be taking place in New York. So you can already get tickets and reserve tickets for that. It's already booking out very fast. So I want to more specifically also contextualize this whole talk and everything we are doing here at HCPP with something that we branded the Open Hardware Dialogues. And I'm calling it, or we are calling it Dialogues, because we found out it's a very good method for us in order to learn and to understand and to learn about new projects and also to communicate. So it's a very discursive way also of our whole events that we are organizing. So that means we are collecting a lot of knowledge and a lot of content that we will be publishing at a later stage. You can find the current program always on RightIT/Open Hardware, because there's a lot of things also that we are coming up with a little bit last minute. So a little bit here the details. So at HCPP itself, there will be a few meetings and meetups today, I think is one, and tomorrow. We will have a small exhibition also, which is at a hidden location, not disclosed yet. And then we will continue also to Japan Blockchain Week, where there will be an additional program, which is not entirely released right now. So the whole Open Hardware Dialogues thing will then be concluded with the C3, with the annual Chaos Communication Congress, where we will be publishing some material and some small print release. And then there will also be a larger release at the Open Source Hardware Summit in New York in 2020. But now to my actual talk, which is called The Past, Present, and Future of Opt-out with Open and Libre Hardware. And I want to actually start this with the question, and I'm not sure if everyone understands what open hardware means, and to be more precise, what open source hardware means. And in a way, what's the problem? Why do we need open hardware? What is this for? And I'm always starting because I think this is the right and very interesting publication, has been put already very precisely by Jonathan Zittrain, who was basically pinning down the fact that consumers have been shifting from generative to tethered technologies. This is how Zittrain describes it. And what does he mean with these tethered appliances or tethered technologies? So in a way, our hardware gets less and less repairable. You can interact with the hardware much less than you could in the previous days or in the previous decades. And in a way, this was a key principle or a key idea behind hardware for a long time. So if we look, for example, at personal computers and how this whole idea of a personal computer started, it was actually delivered to be assembled by the people at home. So you would receive some kind of a mail order package, you would assemble the computer yourself, and you would be automatically tinkering with it, because you can assemble it in a different way, you can create it in a different way, you can extend it. So this kind of extendability, repairability was a key principle of hardware back in the days. So this is also relevant in terms of cryptography, because this microcomputing revolution, as here Arvin Narayanan puts it, was actually also relevant because it brought back all these kind of ideas that we find in these ideas of the cypherpunks, of crypto anarchy. So we had encryption for the first time publicly available, which was actually computable at home and not at mainframes. So this is why microcomputers have been, and the microcomputing revolution was super relevant for this whole movement we have now. But at the same time, the devices that we have these days don't look and don't feel like this kind of original devices of the microcomputing revolution. So we remember how that turned out after the microcomputing revolution. So we had the crypto wars of the 90s, where people smuggled out the RSA source code on T-shirts and so on. This is an old story, we know it all. And in a way, to conclude the first point I want to make, closed devices reduce technological literacy. So we learn less about these devices we have these days. And this is actually how Citrain puts it, this kind of problem with tethered devices. So you're basically locked into specific hardware. On the example of the iPhone, you cannot even replace the battery yourself without maybe destroying the device or at least voiding the warranty of it. And at the same time, you don't know what is going on. You cannot control it, you cannot verify it. It's a big problem, especially from this kind of crypto-anarchic ideals that we hopefully have. So you cannot repair them. It's actually a lose-lose, it's a win-lose situation after all. So this idea of this right to repair is currently very much debated, and I'm also pointing here to this repair.org movement. It's a very strong debate that is going on in the US right now. I suggest you check this out as well, because it's also having a huge, enormous economic effect if information about devices would be available not only to the manufacturers. So to give you another example, like there is specific hardware that can only be repaired by the manufacturers, which is, in my opinion, a problem, because you have a third party you're trusting, you cannot repair this yourself. And ideally, all documentation is available to a lot of people, that people can create small repair shops, or so it has a definitely a economic aspect as well. So in a way, also though, repairing is a way of regaining knowledge. So as soon as you're touching those devices and trying to repair them, you learn a little bit about these devices. So this knowledge, this repair knowledge, is very essential to hardware development or to hardware knowledge. So in a way, reverse engineering also is a very important step, and that means you have to understand what kind of hardware you have. So that means repairing it could be a first step to regain this kind of technological literacy. This is a very good book, and I'm a big fan also of Andrew Bunny Huang, who is explaining this also very good in his book, The Hardware Hacker, and he explains different stories on how to reverse engineer different approaches. So this is a very good starting point for someone who wants to dig deeper into hardware reverse engineering. It's a very recommended book. Interestingly also, and I love actually what Bunny says here, without the right to think and explore, we risk becoming enslaved by technology, and the more we exercise the right to hack, the harder it will be to take that right away. So it's, in my opinion, super important to also make sure that device hacking, opening devices, checking what kind of hardware you receive from a verifiability perspective, but also from a educational perspective, is an integral thing. It shouldn't be taken away from you. So there is still attempts to make sure that you cannot repair or open or kind of disassemble specific devices such as cars, and it's always considered sometimes a security principle that it's not repairable. It's a good thing. In my opinion, it's a very bad thing, because you lose the property actually to verify what you actually got. Open hardware in this context can actually help regain this literacy. And here's actually, I took this quote also from this kind of official definitions of open hardware. So because there's not only the device itself verifiable, but you have specific properties of the device, such as the drawings, the schematics, the design, the material, the PCB layout data. All of this is like open source. So you don't only learn about how your device works, and you don't learn only how to validate it, but you can learn the craft and the skill that is needed in order to produce devices themselves. So there's a very good starter for people that are not so deep into the open hardware topic. This is called Building Open Source Hardware, and it's written and edited by Alicia Gibb and et al. And I want to here also point to a very interesting article which explains the difference between open hardware and open software a little bit, because it's not the same things. You cannot compare it. It's an entirely different domain in a way. So we have the fact, and Michael Weinberg states this in his text in this book, that hardware is born open. So that means while open hardware or while software with GPL and CC licenses can be secured in a way, or you can basically control it more granularly, it's a different story with hardware, because it's actually falling under patent law, which means it's considered something useful or things that do stuff. On the other hand, code and everything falls under artistic premises. So that means it's considered artistic work. I find that always interesting, because you have to, so art cannot be useful, or what's the problem with our society? So this is an interesting aspect, but from a legal perspective, this is the problem. So it's like not that easy to make sure that nobody basically violates specific rights that you want to give a specific product. So the way how this is usually done in open hardware is trademarks. So a very good example in this context is the Arduino, which is a trademark, and then everything else is released, and there's a lot of Arduino clones, but people would actually remember the trademark, that you cannot use the Arduino trademark on your own product. There's also specific licenses for this to tackle this specific problem with open hardware, or with actually that you save your or fine granularly make sure that how is it actually used, which is the Tabra license. It's a kind of older license. Then very famous one is the CERN open hardware license. There's the version 2 currently drafted. This is online as well if someone is interested, and GPL v3 is also sometimes used in the context of open hardware designs. So here's a very good quote also from Richard Stallman, who is explaining basically the same facts that I have just outlined. So that, he explains what is the problem, why is this not so easy solvable, and this is also a chapter in our book, Openism Conversations in Open Hardware. So open source hardware works differently than open source software, and there are a lot of new challenges that get introduced, and we have to face them somehow when we are designing a product or project. So I want to give a few examples, because it might not be tangible yet. So a very good example, in my opinion, are wireless routers. And this was a very important router in terms of like open source movement, because it's the Linksys WRT54G, which is said to be the best-selling router of all times. And actually, this is important because the OpenWRT firmware was actually running on this computer and could have been developed because there was a lot of information about the hardware available. So it was licensed also partly under the GNU General Public License firmware we're talking. And in a way, this actually also was showing that it was a good attempt, because we have a lot of developments, and the OpenWRT is only one of the alternative firmwares you can use on routers. And this is a very good example, in my opinion, also because we can see all the arguments I will be giving in this talk on one kind of category of products, which is routers in this case. So you might be familiar with the Turis Omnia open hardware router. It's also a very interesting project. So this is basically also only made possible because we had this initial reverse engineering and availability of the source code of the Linksys. And a maybe more radical approach would be then the LIBRE CMC, which is a LIBRE firmware. So basically this runs on a very limited amount of devices only, because the attempt of LIBRE approaches versus open is that you have no binary blobs in the drivers, so you can actually also make sure that the software and the drivers are not having any backdoors or any other information that you cannot verify. Another example is cameras. There's a long tradition in hacking cameras, because usually people are restricted in what they can do with their cameras. Technically, though, a camera sensor can be used for still photography or for video photography. So this is a very interesting project, the CHDK Canon Hack Developer Kit, which was actually a community-run project on trying to reverse engineer Canon cameras, like very simple Canon cameras for photography use or for like extended use for photography. A more popular approach was the Magic Lantern project. Maybe it's more well-known already, which basically enabled people that were filming with these Canon-based cameras, DSLR cameras, to use an individual firmware that was giving them basically pro usage for that you would usually have only in very expensive cameras. So it's, in my opinion, also a very important project. And then this would be like the most radical approach, also a project we have been working with, and I have been also presenting at the C3, the Apertus open source cinema camera, which is a completely open hardware camera. So that means like every part is as open as it's possible. So in this case, I won't go into the details. You can see the talk online, but the idea is here that you can basically modulate or like control, extend, and so on the software and the hardware at maximum liberating force, so to say. So I want to here actually propose 3 different opt-out possibilities that we have with open hardware today. So the first would be to actually open up the hardware through reverse engineering in order to verify. That means in a specific security setting, but also for our own sake, and not to be paranoid here, but there's a lot of hardware implants, of course, existing in devices. This would be an opt-out, basically. Another opt-out, in my opinion, is to create alternative firmware, and I will give a tangible example in a second, to add features that the hardware didn't have in the first place. In order, I mean, if you take this from a radical perspective, you could also even, in my opinion, create a future opt-out society by completely decoupling your information and communication methods with hardware. And the third part being to create open source hardware yourself. This is a long and very long task. And also, as we saw on the Apertus open source cinema camera, can take years. So in the example of the camera, this took over 12 years to have a first functioning project there. So the problem, though, is what I maybe hopefully explained in a way that people could understand. This tethering of these ecosystems is a big problem. So it's not only hardware which is tethered. It's not only that you cannot repair your hardware anymore. It's also the problem that the software cannot be changed. So this is due to the fact that the manufacturers want to keep you in this kind of end-to-end situation where you're using all sorts of ways that they can actually profit on any step that you're using their hardware. So hardware usually comes bundled with software. It's no way that you, without reverse engineering, can install your own firmware. There are a few examples, though, that I will show in a second. And usually the problem and the limitation is that there's no documentation about it. You have to do a lot of work, and usually for the regular person, it's too much work. So enter device liberation alternative firmwares. It's a huge field and a huge culture. And I just picked a few examples to show you why this is important, where it works, in my opinion. So usually you start with having some kind of hardware that actually analyzes any part or every part of the hardware you want to look at. So this is a very famous one. It's the bus pirate, which actually has specific properties that you can actually find out, okay, what is the device, what is the protocol here at stake, how is the device communicating with my computer, how is it communicating at all, and so I can actually a little bit find out more about the device. This is a less known device, which in my opinion is a little bit better than the bus pirate. So in case you're doing reverse engineering, take a look at this. It's the Shakira, it's called, and you can find this on, and it's a lot of information about this device. It helps you with all this kind of pitfalls, because usually people start to build the Arduino breadboard thingy, and there's a lot of other things, and it will be slow. So there's a few existing devices where you can actually speed up the process in reverse engineering. Alternative firmwares to create this kind of secure and unmonitored communication, as envisioned by the cypherpunks and as also mentioned in this crypto-anarchic manifesto, is regainable, in my opinion, by reverse engineering and by regaining the control over devices. And I want to give here a very tangible example. I mean, nobody worked on this. There's a huge community that worked on this project, but I think this could be extended. We could use this already, and if someone is like up for some hardware hacking, then this is a very good thing to start. So this is a very cheap walkie-talkie handset. So you can basically communicate with people over FM, over different technologies, and basically this is a Chinese knockoff thingy. It's like $120. And you can buy this. It's by Travis Goodspeed and all, and it's on GitHub. And the good thing, it's cheap. It runs already alternative firmware, so you don't have to reverse engineer it. There's a community of 60 or 80 people already reverse engineered the whole thing, and it's easy to build upon. So what comes to mind is, for example, to create some channel hopping, public-private key, SMS function on this thing, or also to extend it with some other communication system. But this would be like a non-internet usable communication system of the cypherpunks, theoretically. It's very advanced. You should really take a look. This is another good example because I like it because it's such an easy hack. So there's the Osmo FL2K processor, which can be used for multiple applications. So this is a completely documented chip, and it's basically easy usable for software-defined radio. Basically, you can do a lot of things with software-defined radio because you can create everything that sends things and transmits things. It's just limited on the amplifiers and other hardware parts you use, but basically it's a very good starting point. And the good thing about this is it costs $5. So there's also already a huge community around this hardware. And the interesting thing is this comes mostly in this kind of USB 3 VGA adapters. So there's a few interesting buying guidelines online how you can actually find them. You can spot them on eBay for maybe cheaper even than $5. The interesting thing is you could easily build with this, for example, your own DVB-T pirate radio or video or television station or something. You could spoof GSM base stations in a second. You can do some man-in-the-middle attack. It's a very good systems penetration tool as well. In my opinion, it's a very good starting point. There's a vast amount of documentation online about this device. So I want to give you also some two other examples where open hardware actually helped with specific opting out of specific elements that were in a way not verifiable or that solve specific elements of verifiability or centralization that come with device centralization. So basically we are trusting a lot into Apple or specific manufacturers in that they give us the devices, they don't introduce backdoors into the hardware and software. So there's two very interesting examples which I identified, which explain a little bit better why I think open hardware makes sense in this context. So one project that I think is really interesting is the Safecast organization. They started a crowd-sourced Geiger counter, which was called, I don't know how to pronounce this, BGeiG or something. It's on safecast.org, and it basically looked like this. And it's a Geiger counter, so you can actually make sure you can identify radiation levels. And this was actually used in order to verify the information that was given out after the Fukushima incident in Japan. So people would actually crowdsource this information, would actually crowdsource what they are measuring, and then would make this data available. And there was different researchers who, first of all, had access to this data, and secondly, could actually then compare this information to the information that has been given out by the government, which was different, to be honest. This is all evident now, and we can see how there has been misinformation going on. And it's a very easy example how you can basically opt out of this information asymmetries. Basically, you are creating your own truth, you are designing your devices, and then you can actually fact-check the situation. Another very, very interesting example, and this is a talk that was given on the 34C3, which is called Vintage Computing for Trusted Radiation Measurements in a World Free of Nuclear Weapons. It's a very interesting talk. I can strongly suggest to see the talk. But this is also interesting from a cypherpunk perspective. I mean, not that I'm saying like we have possibly a nuclear war, hopefully not. But the problem is that there's a specific problem to solve related to trust that you have with disarming nuclear warheads. And the problem is, in order to disarm, you need to confirm the authenticity of these warheads. They have an individual, unique radiation signature. And the problem is that this information and most of the validation that is needed in order to disarm it involves multiple parties to say, okay, this is the correct warhead, and it's actually, and now we're disarming it. So you need at a specific time a lot of simultaneous verification. And the problem here starts that, let's say we have I don't know, 5 large parties that have nuclear warheads, and they have some certain kind of understanding how to disarm. You have to make sure that a certain party A and party B has hardware that can be trusted at the same time. So ideally, these people create their own hardware. And this is where open hardware comes into play. It's a very good, interesting scenario. It's a very speculative scenario because due to my knowledge, nobody yet uses open hardware to disarm, but we should disarm. Maybe open hardware can help there. And this paper basically solves and tackles a lot of these questions and has open hardware as the answer in order to disarm nuclear warheads. So interesting choice on hardware was the Apple II board. Why did they choose this kind of vintage board? Because it's completely documented. It's very easy to verify. You basically can't do anything wrong. It would be accessible on after-sale markets. So let's say you would get it in China, you would get it in any part of the world. The problem might be, okay, Apple could have built in some kind of backdoor back then, but it's so verified that you can easily measure every part of this board. And so this original Apple II was extended with a few custom-designed open hardware elements that would be needed for this nuclear disarmament. And these are like new produced hardware modules for the Apple II. So another hint to a possible project would be, why don't we use these sorts of devices, these verifiable devices, to create keys? We are all using like very new hardware, on the example of even the crypto hardware wallets that are, there might be backdoors in the chips. There's even basically documented backdoors in the chips. So why don't we use like hardware like that to create our master keys or something like that? So there's a lot of applications, in my opinion, from a cypherpunk perspective or from a crypto anarchic perspective, where we can actually, we could not look at new devices, but look at vintage devices that could actually help then in order to recreate the trust. So the solution would be to use vintage verifiable hardware in combination, there's a typo I found, with open source hardware. That's always good. So the verifiability is good. But also open source hardware doesn't mean that the components are always verifiable. So I would have to extend this by saying verifiable open hardware. What is the relevance to crypto enthusiasts in this context? And this is because I would say most of you are crypto enthusiasts. Hardware random number generators is a good example. So it's randomness. This is a huge topic. It's a large debate, and I don't want to go into the details, and I don't want to debate about it. But I'm a big fan of hardware number generators. I'm collecting them. I love them. It's amazing. And here's just a few of them, which I also find like visually appealing. This is a maybe more interesting one in my opinion because it's a LIBRE hardware. But what is LIBRE hardware and what is open hardware? So again, if we look at the router firmwares, it's ideal if you have verifiable open source hardware and if you have also software that doesn't run any binary code on it, binary blobs, so to say. So you can actually check, okay, is the software possibly having a backdoor? No. Is the hardware having a backdoor? No. And basically the problem still, and the limit is the hardware because there's very, very few undocumented or there's very few fully documented chips out there. So for example, to give you a context, in most modern day CPUs, we have a Minix operating system which is started. There could be all sorts of things. While there wouldn't be kind of large data exploits possible, there could always be like metadata leakage, for example. And this is a problem, especially if we look at like privacy-driven cryptocurrencies where you secure the complete software stack, but then the hardware is the weak point. And this is a big problem in my opinion. So entering hardware wallets, well, this is of course also a problem because this is, and I picked those three different hardware wallets out of a reason. They have a very different trust approach. So on the left hand, we see the Trezor, which is an open source hardware which is verifiable because I can actually check, okay, what is built there. I can rebuild it. I can run it on another device. Basically, it's using standard components, so I can completely verify it. In the middle, we have the Bitbox, which is partially open only because it uses open source software, but has an HSM, so I have to trust a hardware security module. So I have to trust the manufacturer of the hardware security model that there's nothing wrong with that. And on the right-hand side, you see the ledger, which is completely closed. So this is like very interesting to see. Are we really happy with these devices? Me personally, I'm only happy with the left one. And the problem is still, okay, do I trust ARM enough for the specific implemented chip? So I would love to have an Apple II to host all my keys, to be honest, just saying. At least with the Trezor, we have the opportunity to build our own devices around this hardware. So that's already a step forward, in my opinion. And to conclude this, what I have been showing you in this kind of marathon. So I was actually arguing that open hardware, creating open hardware would be also a potential opt-out possibility, but it is hard. You cannot really create hardware yourself so fast. It's a lot of knowledge you need to know. This knowledge has been, or this potential has been taken away from us by actually closing down hardware much more. So a good start is to learn and to really reverse engineer and to take apart the things you have lying around at home or in the office. In this context, I want to also refer to a project and workshop that will be taking place here at HCPP. It's the Bleskomat. It's a kind of a reverse engineering of an open source bill count of a bill counting machine in order to figure out how to use this potentially for the Lightning Network. It's in order to create a Lightning Network ATM. It's a very interesting project. I was talking with the creators also. And also the development is easier when you use in your designs existing fully documented components. So on the example of the Fresco Logic FL2000 chip that I was pointing out before, that is in most of this kind of USB 3 VGA adapters, this is a good starting point because you can, there's a huge community behind it and it's very documented. So it's also an easier way to learn, easier way to start. In situations where you have to verify and where this is actually crucial for your organization or where this is crucial for you because you're storing a lot of Bitcoins on your devices, you should use the specific components as part of your design. It's crucial in my opinion. And especially in zero trust situations, as we saw with the nuclear disarming, it's a kind of a different scenario even. So here we have to possibly make sure that we find alternatives so we can actually verify the hardware again. So especially also what I was pointing out here, this alternative crowdsourced radiation counter, it's interesting to see that these kind of projects also work. I was thinking that this is a problem and that people would not rebuild this, but this is a lot of people are using these kind of devices. So this is also important to understand that we can solve other issues by understanding and relearning and regaining this knowledge that has been taken away from us. So in a way, and maybe I didn't argue this enough, open and verifiable hardware can help to create the crypto-anarchic principles, but also to somehow not completely give up on all these kind of ideas of the zero trust society, because while I like the approaches and while I'm also criticizing this on some other ends, I think we have to investigate what this kind of hardware and these available technologies offer us, what they can help us create. And these devices are still missing. There's not a single device out there that completely functions where people are communicating really secure and unmonitored as envisioned in this crypto-anarchic manifesto. So these devices would have still to be built. So I hope someone actually takes on these ideas I was just presenting. So again, also to stress the fact about the LIBRE hardware debate. I don't know if you're not so familiar with it. Please take a look. It's a very huge debate online. So there's even a program actually from the FSF, Free Software Foundation, which specifically rates hardware or basically tells you which kind of hardware is more LIBRE than others. So there's a large list online where there's existing hardware that you can use. So if you're working in cryptography or working with sensitive data, then you should take a look at this list and comprise your hardware stack, or make sure that your hardware stack is comprised of these elements. So usually in kind of hardware security situations or on like high trust situations, people would use, for example, this kind of old hardware. The problem is this is the last hardware that is verifiable from a mobile perspective or like a portable perspective. It's the ThinkPad X200 is super old. I'm also using this myself, but the problem is it's slow, so you can use only very limited graphical features. But the problem is how far do we want to bring the whole verifiability? In my opinion, there is also the problem because a lot of people are looking at purism right now. While I love what they are doing, and I think they're very important addition to this whole security and privacy debate, all the hardware, and especially the CPUs they are using, are showing us a lot of different exploits. it's not Purism's fault at all. It's actually an Intel problem. So we see in all the recent Spectre, Meltdown, and so on incidents that are ongoing that this is just the beginning. You cannot really fix this with a software update. This is actually part of the hardware. So you're basically fucked in a way. There's a lot of side channel attacks. There's a lot of, it's always the same kind of security problems that we have with these devices. So while I think Purism is going into the right direction, we are not at the level of verifiable hardware at all right now. And this has to be solved. We have to solve this. Yeah, thank you so much for my talk.
Thank you.
I completely don't know how I'm time-wise because I'm so concentrated. So
you are in time.
Yeah.
We still have even time for questions, and there is one raised hand.
Thank you for your talk. Basically, it follows from your talk that there are 3 levels of hardware where it can be opened. Basically, it is chip itself, which is integrated circuit, the assembly of the board with the multiple chips potentially, and the firmware. Can you just elaborate on the, because I assume that the chips are the hardest part of the story. Is there any way to verify that an actual chip is corresponding to the open documentation, and how the chips themselves can be open hardware?
I mean, yeah, very good question, thank you. Basically, this is an ongoing debate as well, and we are on the verge of having open silicon, which is in its kind of beginnings. Some people might know that RISC-V and all this kind of different kind of really open silicon that is on the verge of being like released. Currently, we are in the state that a lot of this proprietary hardware is really not verifiable. This is true. So a lot of these, so there could be potential other backdoors we don't know about. This is a very good point, and we have to still work around that. Our technology is not far enough, but in the future, and we will see this very soon, hopefully, we will have very cheap available RISC-V cores, open silicon that you can completely verify yourself. Until then, we have to work around that, and we have to use old and vintage machinery in order for our cryptographic context. It's a problem, especially in cryptography or in like very, in a way, this is also a reason why specific, there's hardware limitations, and the whole crypto economic principles are working around hardware limitations. The whole cryptography is based on that there's not a quantum computer available. In recent news, we saw also that there might be potential speed-ups in specific things that we're building our security model around. This might be around the corner, we don't know, but as soon as we cannot verify the bare hardware we're using, I think we are even more attackable.
Hello, thanks for your talk. On the topic of vintage hardware, there was a recent announcement of a Cubes OS certified Lenovo ThinkPad X230 that runs core boot. I mean, it's at least a bit more modern than the X200. What do you think about that?
There's a lot of debate about core boot or LIBRE boot, and I mean, core boot has its specific limitations, and you will see all the debates online. I don't want to judge here, but there's a lot of interesting team members at the core boot team, just to say the least. You have to look it up yourself.
Thank you. Another question? Okay.
I really like what you're doing, and so I don't want this question to be misconstrued as like not really into it. But like short term, from a pragmatic approach, is there a group of people looking at how do we sidestep these issues? So for instance, I think the Purism project, they have like the microphone kill switch. What is in the same vein as that? Because that seems like eminently doable, and maybe there's ways that we can sort of trick or step around what we perceive as barriers.
It depends on which devices you're looking at, but I would say privacy, and specifically this privacy awareness, is a huge market. So there's not only Purism, there's a lot of other projects as well. So Linux phones are very are coming. There's a lot of prototypes out there. They're not super developed, but Purism is really doing a good step in the right direction. It's I think I'm amazed how fast they were actually producing their product. Also, last year at HCPP there was Todd Weaver giving a talk about the purism system. I really like what they're doing, but it depends on what kind of hardware we are looking at. So there's of course attempts in specific cryptographic hardware or like hardware wallets where that should be made like more open. I would say these kind of things exist in every sector. You just usually don't really see it because they don't have this kind of huge PR budget and they don't have a lot of advertising, but there's a lot of projects out there. So usually in this kind of enthusiast communities, you find a lot of projects like that. Especially, I mean, to really reach end users, this is a tough thing. You need a lot of to raise a lot of money. You need to put a lot of money in your hand to have like a huge PR budget. But there are a lot of projects out there. I don't know where to start. Even there's a lot of them.
Okay, we still got questions.
Thank you for your talk, Canon. I was wondering if not FPGAs would be the best candidate, you know, for a hardware which is so a chip which is you can use it, you can program anything on it. So the problem, if you have the HDL description, you cannot trust the manufacturer that he does not tamper the HDL.
Yeah, also true. I mean, the problem is like, what are we talking about? Because this would be like a very specific use case where you can use it in FPGA. Usually people want to use operating systems like Android or Linux or something on devices. This is like where purism steps in, for example. So this is actually solved. In specific things where we just want to create keys or solve specific issues, then we can of course use specialized hardware. Although it's always introducing another risk or another unverifiability into the game. So I didn't get into detail about that, but it's a very good question. Why don't we use and look at other implementations or other technologies at all? I don't know why actually.
I mean, you can, there's nothing that stops you to program, you know, x86 compatible instructions that CPU on an FPGA.
Yes, very good point.
So then you just have to verify the FPG, and if the FGB is verified, I mean, under microscope, whatever, then you can do anything on it.
Very good, let's do it.
Thank you very much. Some other questions, please? If not so, thank you very much, Matthias.